So welcome back. Thank you very much for taking the time to join us again for another Talking Sense presentation. So this is part three, and in this part we're going to be talking about the special senses. So in this presentation we're going to be thinking about our special senses, and these are the muscle sense, the gravity sense, and the inner body sense. So first of all, let's have a think about the muscle sense. So what do we mean when we talk about the muscle sense? So we have two different movement senses. We have our muscle sense and we also have our gravity sense. So the sensors that pick up information for the muscle sense are found either inside our muscles, in our joints, and they're also in some things called ligaments and tendons, and those are connective tissues which fasten our bones and our muscles together. So these sensors feel both movement and force. And this sense helps us to know where all of our body parts are. So even if we're sitting still, it can help us to monitor where all of our body parts are in relation to each other. We also know the size and weight of each body part, and that's really important for coordinated movement. So this muscle sense helps us feel our body as it's moving. And the muscle sense is always at work in the background. We don't normally notice it unless there is a problem. And that's when things go wrong, is when we tend to be aware of the muscle sense, or maybe of the things that we find difficult. So when the muscle sense is working well, the brain uses this information to do the following. So it helps us to work out how far or near we are from other people or from objects around us. It helps us to work out how high we need to lift our foot up, if we're stepping over something or jumping over hurdles. It helps us to know how much effort is needed when we're going to lift or carry something. So again, if something's really light or something's really heavy, we're going to use just the right amount of force. So we don't want to be putting lots of force on a light thing. We'll end up lifting it up way too quickly. We don't want to be using not enough force on something that's really, really heavy, because that isn't going to lift it off the ground. So our muscle sense also helps us just to make sure the muscles we need to use are toned and ready for action. So if an action doesn't go as planned, the brain uses information for the muscle sense from the muscle sense, and that helps us to get it right next time. So say, for example, this guy on his skateboard hasn't gone quite right, he's taken a tumble, so his brain will remember that information, say, oh, we won't do that next time, we'll try something different. And on the flip side of that, when something does go well, the brain stores this information so that we can do it right again next time. And this is sometimes called a muscle memory. So when our muscle sense doesn't work so well, it can sometimes cause quite a lot of problems for us in day-to-day life. So what we might find we might do is we might use too much force for things. And if we use so much force, we might accidentally break things, or we might accidentally drop things. We might accidentally trip over things or bump into things because we haven't left enough space, or we haven't lifted our foot up high enough to step over it properly. We might be right in other people's space but not realize it, because it's hard for us to tell where we are in relation to other people around us. And again, if our muscles aren't action ready, they might be a little bit too floppy and not ready for action. So our muscle sense is really important for learning new movement skills. So if it isn't working that great, it can be really, really tricky and hard to learn new movement skills. Something as well, if we can't just feel how our body's moving, we might need to look at our body as it moves to work out either what's happening, what it's done, or how it needs to move. And there's some situations where that can be really tricky to actually watch and move at the same time. So for example, if we want to pedal a bike, we might need to look at our feet. But then if we look at our feet, we can't look where we're going. So that makes learning to ride a bike really hard. So the other thing that the muscle sense is important for is feeling comfortable and relaxed in our own bodies. And I'd say the muscle sense is really important for our sense of self. It helps us to feel secure. It helps us to feel grounded, and securely supported, by our surroundings. When we're sitting or standing, we feel firmly secured. Our feet are firmly secured on the floor. Our back, our bum firmly supported by the seat we're sitting on. But if we can't get this feedback from our muscle sense, then we don't always feel relaxed and comfortable when we're sitting or lying. So like I say, it's really important, particularly when we're going to sleep, that our body feels relaxed and comfortable and supported when it's lying down, because if it doesn't, this is when it's really hard to switch off and go to sleep. And if you're somebody who struggles to sleep and you think that maybe your muscle sense isn't working very well from what we've talked about so far, this might be one of the issues as well. So the other thing that our body sense does, our muscle sense, it helps us sort of feel the boundary of where our body ends and the rest of the world begins. And as we were saying, before, sometimes your muscles can be a bit floppy if this muscle sense isn't working very well. And when you've got floppy muscles, it can be really, really hard to either sit up straight or stand up against gravity. And this is really, really hard work, and it can take up a lot of effort. And you might find that you need to sort of to lean against things. So if you're standing, you might need to try and find a wall to lean against, or if you're sitting at a desk, you might need to put your head on the desk, or lean heavily on your arms. And that's going to help you to sit up, because it's really something that's effortful to do otherwise. So the other thing that might be as well is sometimes when our muscle sense doesn't work very well, we can kind of compensate by being very stiff and tense in our body, as a way of helping us to feel. We do it without thinking. We'll talk about it more on the next slide. But because we can sort of tense our muscles up, we quite often feel very stiff and tense, and awkward as well when this sense doesn't work well. So until we reach our adult height, we're constantly growing, and changes in height can happen quite slowly. I don't think people don't normally notice them growing themselves, but you do also have a growth spurt in your teenage years, and you might even notice then that you suddenly feel a lot taller one week than you did the last week as well. So we might suddenly gain an awful lot of height, and we just have to remember that our muscle sense has to keep adjusting, and it has to keep updating every time we grow. So yeah, so how far it was from your arm to your head might have changed from one week to the next as you've grown a lot taller. Again, your arms will be growing taller, your legs will be growing taller, your back will be growing taller. So all of the ratio from one bit to another is going to keep changing all that time. And again, as we're getting used to our bigger body, it's very common for everybody to feel a lot more clumsy and uncoordinated, even if your muscle sense works quite well, just because things are changing so rapidly in your teenage years. The good news is that we can really help out our muscle sense. So if your brain has a hard time figuring out messages from your muscle sense, it might ask to be sent a little bit more information. And if our muscles and joints work a bit harder, they actually make stronger messages, which the brain finds easier to understand. So sometimes we might actually be helping out our muscle sense without realizing that we're doing it. So some of the things that we might be doing that gives our muscles stronger messages are things like walking up or standing on tiptoes, walking really, really heavily, so stomping when we walk, doing lots of jumping and crashing, tensing our muscles really tightly. Again, like the boy in the picture here, bending and crossing fingers, or bending fingers out of the way, wrapping feet around chair legs, or wrapping one leg around the other, sitting cross-legged, biting really, really hard on things. Or sometimes we might really like to wear really heavy shoes and have our laces tied really tight, but not really know why. And actually, maybe it's because it feels comfortable, because it gives our muscle sense that little bit more information. And one of the things that's really hard to do when you need that little bit more help for your muscle sense is to sit still, because when we sit still, our muscles don't get any information at all. And if they need a lot of information about where they are and how they're moving, they just can't get that when you're sitting still. And so it can be really, really tricky. And our brain just tells us to move so we can get more messages. So some of the ways that we might wake up our muscle sense without really thinking about it might be fine, and they might work really well for us. But some of the things that we might do might not be great. So again, sometimes people bite really hard on things that are not really safe for their teeth. So that's not a great thing to do. And sometimes people really sort of crash really heavily into walls and doors and things. And again, that can actually hurt you. So here's thinking about some other ways that we can wake up our muscle sense, in a way that's really good for our body. So things like yoga is absolutely fantastic, because it sends our muscles lots and lots of messages, and it really, really wakes up this sense. So anything where we're kind of using our body weight to exercise, so things like the suspension trainer that's in the picture there are fantastic, or things like doing animal walks, crab walks, donkey kicks, bear walks, that kind of thing. Playing lots of sport really gives strong messages to the muscles. Running, cycling, going to the park, even just doing household jobs or garden jobs. I think that the important thing to do is to find something that you really enjoy doing, because we need to wake our muscles up every day. So you don't want to do something that you don't really want to do. You want to do something that you enjoy doing. So find a sport or an activity that's really good for our muscles and really wakes them up, but something that you really, really enjoy doing, and try and make it part of your routine every day. So again, this is something that I do. I do a lot of weight training, I do a lot of running, and I do it every day, and I do it first thing in the morning, and it really makes me awake and ready to go, and it can help the whole day. If I do it enough, it can really, really help. So having said that, important not to start off too much too soon, because if you haven't done an awful lot of exercise before and you haven't really worked your muscles really hard, really important to start off gently. And again, doctors do say if your muscles and your bones haven't finished growing, you shouldn't be doing any weights or anything like that. So really good to start off really gently if you haven't really done much muscle work before, because you might find that your muscles get really achy or shaky with exercise. And again, you might not be quite strong enough. It takes a while to build up strength, and you might not be strong enough yet for some of the activities that you're trying to do, and you don't want to get disheartened. So starting off with sort of the smallest or lightest thing that you can do, and I would just do a few minutes at a time, and as soon as your muscles start to get a bit achy or feel a bit wobbly, that's time to stop. So try and do just a tiny little bit more each time, um, but again, only if it's safe for you to do so. For some people, if you've got a medical condition, I've been told by a doctor or a physio that you've got to be really careful. So for example, some people might have slightly more bendy joints than other people, so it might be called having some hypermobile joints. So if you've got finger joints or knee joints or elbow joints that tend to just bend a little bit more than they should, you've got to be a little bit more careful when you're doing exercise. So think about things that will work for you. So check with your GP or your doctor what exercises are safe for you. Or again, if you're a bit younger, ask your parent or your carer to do this for you. So something that can be really good for a lot of people. So even if you've got maybe some medical conditions, maybe your joints are not as strong as they might be, things like walking through water. So like in the picture here, about chest height is a great way to get strong. So you get lots and lots of resistance and muscle sense feedback from the water. But because the water's holding your weight, it doesn't put that much strain on your joints. That's a really good way to start off. So next we want to think about our body's gravity sense. So the gravity sense is our body's sense of balance, and the sensors for the gravity sense are found deep inside our ears. And these sensors actually detect the Earth with the pull of Earth's gravity, and they use the pull of gravity to work out where we are in relation to it. So whether we're standing upright, whether we're bending over, or whether we're upside down, all this information is worked out by these gravity sensors. So what does the gravity sense do for us? So the gravity sense is there to keep us upright and to keep us steady. So if we start to lose our balance, it warns us and we either grab hold of something or we put our arms out, and that helps us to stay balanced and to not fall over. So the gravity sense is there to tell us whether a movement is safe or whether it might be dangerous. So for example, the picture here, that I wouldn't be doing that. It looks a little bit dangerous to me. That guy who was upside down on a big bar over a canyon, great. And also the gravity sensor helps us to move really smoothly and safely. So, when we're doing a really complicated movement, like a roll, or like these guys here, they're rolling and jumping and diving. It just helps to smooth that movement out and to keep us safe while we're doing it. So when the sensor works really well, we have a great sense of balance. We can move smoothly, we can move confidently, and the brain understands the messages it gets from the gravity sense, and it makes really good decisions about how to move the body in order to keep us well balanced. So the gravity sense and the muscle sense work together as a team, and this helps to get the timing and the order of difficult movements, like the long jump that we see there in slow motion, just right. So when the gravity sense doesn't work so well, we can find balance tasks really difficult. We can quite easily lose our balance or fall over. For example, if we're shifting our chair, we might accidentally fall right out of it. We might get the timing and order of tricky movements in a muddle. So you might find it really hard to catch a ball or to hit a ball with a racket. The other thing, we can also over or under respond to movement, depending on whether the sensory sieve is filtering out too much or too little information. So if our movement sense is oversensitive, then small movements and just little shifts in balance can feel much bigger, and our brain might react too strongly. Just everyday movement might feel really dangerous or out of control. And the gravity sensors might send an alarm signal to the brain, whenever we move, even if we're not at risk of falling, which would make us really quite wary and scared of moving. So leaning over might make us feel dizzy, and you might react very strongly to being either, somewhere high or just being a little bit off the ground. You might find that your field travels it really quickly. And if you fall or just lose your balance, tripping a little bit, you might actually experience a full-on panic response. And, when you're getting all these danger signals from your movement sense, it's quite often that people will then try to avoid any unnecessary movement as much as they possibly can. So on the flip side, when we're under responsive to movement and information from our movement sense, the brain just doesn't notice small movements at all. It might not notice if we're losing balance. It might not tell us in time when we might fall over. And the brain needs more information. It needs strong messages because that it can notice and it can make sense of those. So what we then have to do, we have a drive to get as much movement as possible. So when we're under sensitive to movement, we need to be really active on the go. So we might need to run everywhere, do lots of things like climbing, spinning, rocking, hanging upside down, anything to get a little bit more movement. So rather than just walking along, we'll be tending to be sort of banging off the walls, dancing along, jumping up and down, standing still, tending to be spinning on the spot, rocking from side to side. And again, if you're undersensitive to movement, you probably love really intense and crave really intense movement. So things like extreme fairground rides with lots of spinning, going upside down. We probably love things like water parks. And people who do extreme sports, who love doing things like bungee jumping and free fall parachuting will tend to be a little bit under responsive to movement, and so they need these really big movement experiences. And the thing, when you need this movement and you crave this movement, you've got this drive to move like this, you really, really can't sit still. No matter how hard you try, you absolutely need to shift and fidget in your seat a lot of the time. So next we're going to think about the inner body sense. And this sense is the one that tells us about all the stuff that's happening inside our body. So the sorts of things it tells us about might be, if we're hungry or need to have a drink, if we need to use the toilet. It will tell us about our heart rate and whether that's getting faster or slowing down. It'll tell us about our breathing rate. It will also tell us about any aches and pains that are going on inside. And our body can react really strongly to our emotions. So, for example, if we're feeling worried or anxious, your chest might feel tight, your stomach might feel knotted, and the inner body sense tracks these body changes. And it might actually be that we notice our body changes before we realize that actually we're feeling worried or anxious. It's that we feel that our stomach is knotted, our heart is beating faster, our chest is feeling tighter, and that gives us a bit of a heads up that something's happening with us emotionally. So when the inner body sense is working well, we know when we need to use the toilet, and the body gives us loads of warning about that. So even if we can't get to a toilet straight away, we can hold on until there is a toilet available. We know when we need to have a drink or when we need to have a snack. And then we get a message that we're full when we've eaten enough food, so we can stop eating and not overeat, which might make us feel sick. So we notice if we've got any pains inside our body, so something like a stomach pain, or if our muscles are aching, we pick up on these messages. We know that we're not very well, and it helps us to do something about it. We also might notice any other changes inside our body. So if something is making us anxious, as we were saying on the last slide there, we might notice that our heart starts beating faster, that our breathing gets faster, that our muscles feel tense. And then that might give us some time to use some calm down strategies before we get too upset. Or so when the inner body sense is not working so well, these are the sorts of things that might go wrong or not work very well for us. So we might not realize that we need to use the toilet until the message is very strong, and this doesn't give us very much time to get to the toilet. And if we can't get to the toilet straight away, we might not be able to wait. We may not feel hungry or thirsty and might not have enough food to eat or enough water to drink to stay fit, healthy and hydrated. We might never get that feeling of being full after meals and want to just keep on eating and eating. We're not always going to notice if we've got a pain or if something changes inside our body. And again, we don't get that pre-warning. Our body doesn't tell us we're starting to get anxious. And so maybe we don't then have time to use some calm down strategies, and we might very, very quickly become extremely worried or extremely anxious or upset. So what can we do to help out our inner senses? Being calm and still and checking in with our body can help us to listen more closely to what it is telling us. And the more we practice this, the easier it becomes. So things like mindfulness exercises and completing a regular body scan can be really, really helpful. Completing a scan of the whole body at once can be really tricky, particularly if you've got any sensory differences. So some specialists recommend just thinking about one part of the body at a time. So for example, starting with the hands and just focusing on those and thinking about how they feel, maybe when exploring different touch sensations or when doing different things. The other thing that can be really helpful is waking up the muscle sense, as this can help us to feel more connected to our bodies in general. And this gives us the foundation we need to start connecting with our inner senses more. So in summary, in this presentation, we talked about the muscle sense, the gravity sense, and our inner body sense. So the muscle, just to recap, the muscle sense has sensors in the muscles and joints, and this helps us feel how our body is moving. Although we don't normally notice messages from this sense, it's really important both for sport skills and also just for helping us to feel really comfortable and relaxed in our bodies. The gravity sense works with the muscle sense, and it tells us if we're standing straight, bending over. Also, the gravity sense warns us if we start to lose our balance so that we can quickly readjust and move and stop ourselves from falling over. When our gravity sense is oversensitive, everyday movement can feel really scary and out of control. If it is undersensitive, we crave movement and really find it difficult to sit or stay still. And the inner body sense is what tells us about what's happening inside our body. And it lets us know if we need to eat, drink, use the toilet, or to take any action to stop us becoming too worried or stressed. So now that we've thought about all the senses in quite a lot of detail, we will move on in the next session to looking at ways in which we can help our senses out.